Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. So recently we talked about an article that blamed green energy for the blackouts in Texas when it was actually caused by the freak winter storm and a poorly winterized power grid in general. Today is going to be a fairly short video. We're just going to talk about how solar and wind are not the only renewables out there. So what exactly is kind of solar? So a quick little bullet point of what solar energy is it's essentially using light energy gathered by panels known as solar panels and converting that into usable energy in the form of electricity. Solar is pretty popular here in Southern California. You see solar panels all over the roofs of private homes. You see commercial buildings using solar, and you see fields of solar panels. And solar is probably the most well-known reusable energy source. It seems to be the one that everyone just kind of clicks. They know solar is a green energy. And the other heavy hitter in the green energy world that everyone seems to know about is wind. So specifically with the Texas article, we talked about they were blaming frozen wind turbines for the power blackouts. But what exactly do they do? Well, wind turbines basically generate usable energy when they spin. Mechanical stuff happens, and because energy like matter cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be transferred from one form or another, the mechanical wind energy can be then transferred to a usable energy like electricity. Now, wind turbines can freeze, and one way to get around that is by providing them with these little heating units to make sure the necessary components stay warm enough to keep spinning. And one thing I see going around is that, oh, well, wind turbines actually draw from the power grid. Like, well, not really. The energy usually that's necessary to run the wind turbine is generated from the turbine itself. So a big disadvantage of wind turbines in some cases is that a certain percentage of the energy they generate has to go back to the wind turbine to keep it running properly, but they don't necessarily draw from the power grid. I know that there are some cases where generators are used to keep the heating going, but that's not necessarily the norm all the time. In general, the wind turbine is also going to generate the energy that it needs to use to continue going. It's not going to tax the power grid. So those are the two main sources of green energy that people know about. As you notice, we're not going very in depth into this. This is just kind of a short little video because I'm so frustrated that everyone just keeps saying that green energy, it's solar and wind, when it is so much more exciting than that. There are at least 3 other forms of green energy that we're going to mention today, and specifically we're mentioning renewables. There are fossil fuel alternatives that are not technically renewables that we're not going to touch on today, but we'll talk about in the future probably. So the first kind of lesser known renewable is geothermal energy. Now, geothermal energy is used in the States. Just, I don't know a whole lot of my peers that really know about it. And admittedly, until I took my climate change class, I kind of understood that it was a thing, but not necessarily what it was. So the very quick and dirty of what geothermal energy is it basically takes the steam from hot water sources below the Earth's surface and uses that to generate usable energy in the form of electricity. And this is more common in areas with more like volcanic activity, because you do have those deep underground hot water sources, and it is a renewable energy because we're not really doing anything. We're just, like with the solar and the wind, we're just tapping into an energy source that's already there. In this case, steam from super hot water way beneath the Earth's surface. So the next source is green renewable energy that's kind of in a little bit of danger because of climate change and has caused problems on its own. It is important to note that just because it's a renewable source of energy doesn't mean that there are not impacts on the environment. Wind turbines and solar panels certainly impact the environment. Like, everything we do impacts the environment. It's just we have to weigh the pros and cons and minimize the negative impacts. So, hydropower. So, things like the dams that generate electricity when water moves through them. And it's exactly that. It uses moving water, so the mechanical energy from moving water, and transfers that into usable energy in the form of electricity. The thing about dams, as climate change affects everything, including precipitation patterns, and we're seeing just big changes happen, it is possible that the current sources of hydropower that places rely on may not be as efficient as the things change. Rivers may not be as reliable in the future, and that's another thing that we need to look at, because this one particular source of renewable energy may or may not be reliable in the future, depending on the impacts of climate change. And also, there's a push to remove dams in certain places, and when new dams are constructed, there's always an impact on the environment. One such case is up in Yosemite, Hetch Hetchy, which is a reservoir that was made by the building of a dam, destroyed a meadow ecosystem and replaced it with that reservoir. So dams, even though they can provide energy and things like that, now not all dams provide energy, by the way. Some are exclusively just to create reservoirs. The Hetch Hetchy is just an example of an ecosystem being destroyed by a dam. Off the top of my head, I don't think it's used to create energy, but I could be wrong. Do not quote me. We need to, specifically with the hydropower and dams and things, need to kind of be very careful about using that particular source of renewable energy, because that one has the possibility to have massive impacts on the ecosystem around it. Now, that being said, there are other sources of hydropower that are being looked at, like if we can possibly generate energy by putting things in rivers that aren't necessarily going to block them, but I don't know how far that research has really gone, and I don't have any current research off the top of my head to add here in the resources. But I know, based on what we discussed in my class, that that is one thing that some people are looking at. And the final sort of renewable energy source we're going to talk about that is technically an experimental renewable energy source that's still in development, but is gotten to the point where it's being used in some places, is tidal energy. So like hydropower, it uses moving water to generate energy. Just in this case, it generates that energy using the tides. So again, this is still in development, but it basically uses the incoming and outgoing tides to move these turbines that then generate energy. So this one is one that I find particularly fascinating, especially since I live in Southern California. I mean, the beach is only like an hour away. this is a source of energy that is particularly advantageous to coastal communities. And the thing about having a power grid that's dependent entirely on renewable energy is that we're not only going to use one or two of these sources of energy. We have to utilize all of the sources of energy available. So saying that the sun doesn't shine all the time is kind of an asinine argument, because you're ignoring all of the other forms of renewable energy out there, and the fact that if we have a power grid that is responsibly managed and actually runs on renewable energy, it's not just going to be, we're going 100% solar. It's going to be, no, we have bits and pieces of our energy coming from these different sources, and depending on which source is most advantageous, that source is going to be producing more energy at the times when it's going to spike. So it's not as simple as the sun doesn't shine all the time or the wind doesn't blow all the time. It's much more nuanced than that. And the thing is, a future with 100% green energy is entirely feasible. It just needs a little bit of work, and unfortunately work also requires money to make it happen, and fossil fuels line the pockets of a lot of the people making the big decisions. So as long as that's the case, I'm a little pessimistic here, but renewable energy is not just sun and wind. Renewable energy is so much more, and it's entirely possible. You just have to, one, kind of research to understand how it's not just the sun and the wind, and also we need to be willing to put the work in, and the jobs that will be lost in the fossil fuel industry will just shift to renewable energy, because again, it's so much more than just building some wind turbines and solar panels. It's maintaining everything, making sure everything's running properly, and keeping the power grid running 24/7, no matter what the world throws at it. And that is entirely possible on renewable energy. So I'm going to stop here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening, what have you. I hope that this short little video kind of helps you see that it's not just sun and wind. It's so much more, and it's much more nuanced than the naysayers are making it seem. And I will see you all in the next one. Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane B. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.